Yo guys, it's Slyroh. You already know that today I'm bringing you my final impressions for Persona 3 Reload. About 2 months ago, I uploaded a video giving my initial impressions of Persona 3 Reload after a few hours of gameplay, and now it's time to give my final impressions now that I have finished the game. This video is not meant to be a full-on structured review. It is meant to just sort of give my thoughts and opinions on the game that I've played, as well as compare them to some of the points that I brought up in my initial impressions to see if any of them were valid concerns, see if things continued in a right direction, wrong direction, as well as my thoughts on the game overall. Also, this video will contain spoilers, as I don't want to try and dance around topics without addressing them directly, so you have been warned. So, as I mentioned, I did complete the game. My final playtime came in at 73 hours and 52 minutes, so quite a lengthy game, and that included me getting to the end of January, beating Nyx, doing all that. There was a door that was sealed at the top of Tartarus that I never went in. I never figured out how to do that, so there was probably a couple extra things that I didn't do, but I would say that that encompasses essentially the entire game. I have a lot of mixed opinions on the game, so I think in order to structure it, I'm going to talk about some of the main points that I raised in my initial impressions and talk about how that has changed or not changed over time. But just to set the scene for anybody who did not watch my initial impressions, this is coming from the perspective of somebody who has never played Persona 3. This is the only version of Persona 3 that I've ever played, and the only other Persona game that I've ever played is Persona 5 Royal. So some of my experiences in this game are going to compare to that game a little bit, and that is all of the Persona knowledge that I have at my disposal. So this game is a mixture of turn-based combat as well as social simulation where you hang out with characters and increase social links, as well as you can spend time to increase your stats. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the balance that this game strikes between all that, and I think it does okay. I do really like the social simulation part of the game. I really liked all of the social links. Well, not all of them, but most of them. And anytime that you were focusing on just increasing social links, I felt like the game was progressing at a very nice, steady pace. There is a weird balance where there is a lot more to do during the day than there is in the evening. However, I found that as I went on that I kind of appreciated that, as during the day I could focus a lot on my social links, and during the night I can focus a lot more on increasing my social stats. I didn't catch on to that early enough, and because of that I wasn't able to actually finish all of the social links in the game, but I do think that if I had a better understanding of where I should have spent my time, I probably could have done all the social links, but I did not optimize my time to the best, so I didn't get through all of them. I only missed out on, I think, 3, and by missed out, I mean I didn't finish them to completion. I at least started all of them. And we'll get more into the social links later, but right now, since I'm just talking about the balance of the game, the one part where the game sort of falters a little bit is just how much time is spent in Tartarus. That is the only place where you do combat, and there were times that I was in there for hours and hours on end. And there were times where it was really just getting on my nerves and just being a bit too much for too long. It would have been nicer to have them broken up into smaller sections, which I could potentially hear you say, oh, well, you don't have to do it all at once. You can, do a couple floors, then leave, and then go back to Tartarus another time, and then leave and go back another time. The only problem with that is I feel like the game is at conflict with itself with what it wants Tartarus to be for you in terms of how much time you're spending there. The characters are always encouraging you, oh, hey, let's go to Tartarus tonight. Oh, let's go train in Tartarus. However, once you're in Tartarus, there's basically no reason to leave because the game has a system set up where you get cards and whatnot for from Shuffle Time, which always procs when you finish a fight with an all-out attack, but sometimes will pop up randomly, even if you just finish a fight normally. And those cards, especially the further that you get into the game, they will add these major arcana cards that add effects, and a lot of them will be benefits and buffs that last for as long as you're inside of Tartarus. So you might get a card that is, you can pick one extra card. You might get one that is your all-out attacks do more damage until you leave Tartarus. And there's multiple of those that gives you buffs that you don't really want to lose out on if you leave Tartarus. Not to mention that if you get a certain amount of those major Arcana cards, you get Arcana Burst, which I believe essentially just ups the effectiveness and level of the other cards that you'll get from there on out. So after you get an Arcana Burst, normal cards that you would get are just at like a higher level, so you might get more experience than normal, or more money than normal, or like a better skill card than normal, or things like that. So while at times I felt like Tartarus was dragging on, I couldn't bring myself to leave knowing that it was just going to rob me of all this progress, and then I would have to start building that chain back up again if I came back at a later time. And I'll touch on more of the combat and stuff later, but just to summarize my point about the balancing of the game, you spend a little bit too much time in Tartarus, but outside of Tartarus, I feel like the game progresses at a very, very nice pace between the story, the cutscenes, the social simulations, the days going by. Everything progresses very nicely, but you do spend a bit too much time in Tartarus. The next point that I brought up in my initial impressions was actually the fact that Tartarus was a little bit repetitive and that I was hoping for more unique dungeons and stuff like that, as Persona 5 Royal had palaces and had puzzles to progress and all that sort of stuff, and I was hoping to see something like that in Persona 3 Reload, and that did not happen, which was a big disappointment. Now, to its credit, Persona 3 Reload did try to do things where it had certain sections, and so the visuals and the way that the pathing would work would be different every so often. As you progress through the game, you would get higher up Tartarus, and there would be different areas. However, the core gameplay was the exact same, and once you got through a couple floors of the new areas, it would start to fall back into that samey territory. There were no puzzles or anything like that to speak of to progress. It was all just combat. Now, there were floors that had gatekeepers and other little mini-bosses that would act as an obstacle as you were climbing Tartarus, but that is the only change in the formula between the repetitiveness of just walking through the floor, defeating shadows, and all that sort of stuff. So that was a big letdown. And I think now is where I can sort of throw in my opinions on the combat, as it doesn't really change from my initial impressions, where I said that the combat was very straightforward and easy. All you do is find enemy weaknesses, attack weakness, go for all-out attacks, and then rinse and repeat. And then a lot of the bosses don't even have weaknesses, so it's literally just do damage and survive. And it's just, do as much damage as you can, maybe try to get some skills that will increase your damage or whatever. Maybe get some skills that will up your party's defense or whatnot. Make sure you have items or abilities that can cure status, but I really was let down by the bosses in general, because a lot of them don't have weaknesses, can't be statused, and like the only thing you can do is just do damage and not die. And just like it has a larger health bar, so the only thing that's different between that and normal enemies is you can't find a weakness and you just have to like go through the combat longer, and it's very repetitive, it's not super exciting. And I don't exactly know what I would change about it, but I just feel like the combat wasn't overly engaging when it came to the different boss fights. There were some bosses that had some gimmicks where maybe there was 2 or 3 bosses that would have different weaknesses, where if you're trying to attack all of them, some of them would block the damage, some of them would absorb it and heal from it. And so maybe you had to focus on one over the other. I know there was one that had a gimmick of where they were really just focusing on draining your SP, while being, I think, either immune or something to physical damage. I know there was one that would aggro you to attack them, and then they would reflect physical damage. So if you got charmed, your characters would then go to try to slash because you'd lose control of them, and then they would do damage to themselves. So there were some neat ideas thrown throughout, but I would say about 80% of the time, it's really just, spend 5-10 minutes or longer doing damage and not dying. But there's only so much that you can do with turn-based combat gameplay, especially when this is a franchise that has an established way of how its combat works. So there's not really much that I could say that needed to be added, but the only way I can phrase it is the higher and higher up that I went and the harder and harder bosses, quote-unquote, that I would face, I really felt like it wasn't increasing in difficulty. It was just a longer health bar, and I was spending more time just doing the same old monotonous thing. And it really kind of dragged on by the end, especially the last couple bosses. I was just so over it at that point. I really felt like they were just dragging it out for like no reason. At that point, it doesn't even really feel like you're inputting any sort of strategy. You've come up with a system by that point. You know what does the most damage, and you just do that until you win. And I will give the game credit for trying to implement systems to at least sort of distract you from the very simple combat with things like the Theurgy gauge, the special abilities that Fuka could give you, and then just the presentation of it all. I mean, you have great music playing in the background, the visuals look really nice, all of the attacks are very clean, so that can serve as a distraction because it isn't so boring that nothing is engaging, but it's really only engaging in a visual sense. There's not much strategy to like 90% of the fights in this game. Moving away from the combat, but sticking with the gameplay, the next thing that it's really funny to look back and see my initial impressions on is the shuffle time mechanic where you get cards, because early game I was only picking money and doing nothing else, and it's really funny to see that changed over time as money stopped being much of an issue, and instead I found that I was picking the card that gave me extra experience. However, that wasn't the only thing I was doing, as sometimes I would pick new personas. Sometimes I would pick the effects that would heal your party, and then I would balance that with choosing the major arcana cards when they would show up. So I actually did start picking a good variety of different cards from Shuffle Time. The only ones that I still feel did not really offer that much were the skill cards. Because you can get so many different personas, I found that I was never really lacking in too many different abilities that I needed on the main character, so it just never really felt worth using. Unless I needed them for some of Elizabeth's quests, which she would give you quests, and we'll get into that as a separate thing, but she would give you quests about having a certain persona with a certain skill, and there was a couple times where I didn't know what to fuse to get the specific skill that I needed, so I would either find a way to get the skill card, or I would just happen to have it on me, and I would be able to use that, and then I can get my reward from Elizabeth, so that was pretty nice. The only thing I wish I could have done is gotten rid of the excess skill cards that I wasn't using, maybe sell them for money or other materials or something like that. If there was a system like that in the game, I never found it, so in the end, I had a lot of random extra skill cards that I couldn't do anything with. And a lot of those skill cards weren't picked as a result of Shuffle Time. There were chests that were all throughout Tartarus that you would have to use Twilight Fragments to open, and a lot of those would give out skill cards and whatnot. But those chests were actually a pretty cool mechanic because you never know what you were going to get. And I never felt like I was short on Twilight Fragments, so that was really nice. I was always able to have enough to open every chest that I came across. As I got later in the game, I kind of stopped opening the ones that only had like one of the things where you only needed one Twilight Fragment to open it, and would focus on the ones that only had 2 or 3. But even then, I still generally opened most of them just because I always happened to have enough Twilight Fragments on me. So that never really seemed to be an issue, which I thought was pretty neat and offered some sort of goal on the floor that was something else besides just get to the next floor, so that was pretty nice. And because I brought up the Elizabeth requests, I will go ahead and talk about them now, because when I had played the first few hours of the game in my initial impressions, I hadn't made it to that part yet. So throughout the game, Elizabeth will give you a lot of requests. A lot of them are just bring her certain items, whether it's a certain weapon, whether it's a persona that does something. She'll have you show her around certain areas of the city. She might have you bring a special item that you can only get from like certain shops. She has a lot of random quests from you, and a lot of them you can figure out just by walking around, interacting with different places, and I feel like it's a good way to encourage the player to go to places that they otherwise wouldn't. Early on, I felt like I was able to figure out most of them, but as it went on, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't messing up any of the quests, and I started just using the internet to try and help me figure out exactly how to get all the stuff that I needed. But either way, I thought that was a really cool system, and I really did like engaging with that. I got almost all of the requests done. I only missed a couple in the very end, and I'm perfectly okay with that, but I did enjoy that a lot. The next point that I brought up in my initial impressions was the social links, so that's something that we can talk about now. There are 22 different social links in the game, and I think 3 of them sort of progress automatically throughout the story. So that's 19 different characters that you can go out of your way to connect with and learn more about. And I do say characters as because I was initially confused by the labeling, because a lot of times your social link would start and it would be categorized in the game as student council or track team or whatever, but your social links are just with one person, which is pretty nice, as I really do like learning more about the different characters. I thought overall that the social links were very good, some of them better than others. Some of my standouts would include the rival athlete Hayase, the dying young man Akinari, and the team manager Best Girl Yuko, while the ones that I cared the least for were the gourmet king Suimitsu, as well as your classmate, Tomochika, and everyone else was just a varying level of good. With the social links, it seemed like the better that your answers were, the faster you could progress through the social links, but because I didn't use a guide or anything, there were some times where it was harder to progress with some compared to others. One system that I did end up liking is you could buy a dating site note or whatever it was called in the Club Escapade, and over the last month, like every night, I was just using the computer to sort of up my points with each social link that I wasn't ready to gain the next level with. and that way, the next time I would be able to hang out with them, I would be able to increase their rank, which that was a really nice system, especially because within the last month or two of the game, I really didn't have anything to do at night, so giving me a way to increase my social links while being able to take up some of that time at night was a pretty good system. But overall, I really like the social links and the social link system of this game. I actually would struggle to say whether they're better or worse than the ones in Persona 5 Royal, because that game also had a mixed bag of some were great, some were bad, and a lot of them were in the middle, so the fact that they're even in the same conversation is a positive. The last thing that I want to bring up that was not covered in my initial impressions is something that I have to talk about, which is just how much this game is willing to go there. Like, Aragaki's entire story and the fact that he eventually joins you and then ends up dying after you are able to use him, like, in your party. Like, I was using him as an active party member, and then he was taken away from me, which I feel like should make me mad, but I just respect that so much because I feel like so many times games are not willing to really hammer home how serious some of the events in the game are, and this is a serious event, like, in the game. Like, people do die over these things. As a similar thing happens with the entire arc of Chidori, where I was convinced when she first started showing up that she was going to end up being a party member or something and just, like, be a good guy and just go to join us and we're going to save the world, but, like, that's not the way that her arc went, and it ended very tragically for her. And it's just something that I really respect the game for doing, instead of just being able to use, like, the power of friendship to solve everything, because that's where I just feel like a lot of games go. That's not to say that every twist and every story beat was, like, perfect, because there was a lot of things that I didn't like, but that's mostly the twist of the chairman, Ikusuke, being bad, which is just, like, whatever. Also, just, like, the villains in general, like Strega, is just, like, I don't really care for any of them. They're kind of stupid, and I didn't really like any of them, honestly. But I just want to address, I was actually looking up the name of the chairman, because I didn't remember it off the top of my head, and I saw that there actually are ways to save both Aragaki and Chidori, or at least Chidori, it sounds like you can revive her or something like that, but I don't know if that's for Persona 3 Reload, as the page that I was looking at was only referencing the original Persona 3, so either way. Before I get any sort of comment being like, oh, actually, they don't die and you just screwed up, it's like, I mean, I don't really care if I screwed up and, like, they died. I mean, that's still a route that the story can take, which is still, I respect that enough as it is. And so for the final summary, I want to address the final summary that I did for my initial impressions, which is 1, that I wanted more interesting dungeons and puzzles, 2, that I wanted more interesting combat, and 3, that I wanted more interesting characters. I did not get any more interesting dungeons. That was a big letdown in that department, even though Tartarus did end up changing up its look throughout the floors. But overall, that was a failure. I did get slightly more interesting combat as they introduced things like the Theurgy and other things, but overall, my opinion on Persona's combat as a whole has not changed much from what I thought it was coming into this game. And lastly, I did get more interesting characters. The main party did expand, and some of the new party members were definitely better than some of the original ones that she started out with. Some of the social links in this game are among my all-time favorites, and I definitely have a few characters that are going to join the ranks of some of my favorite characters in video games. So that was a big improvement from my initial impressions of this game. So that's going to do it for my final impressions of Persona 3 Reload. I'm not going to give any sort of score or grade or anything like that. If you want to know how I feel about this game compared to others that have come out this year, then you're just going to have to stay tuned for when I do my annual end-of-the-year list. Depending on how many good games come out this year, whether it'll be a top 10, top 15, I'll make that decision way down the line. And you can see then how high up on the list this game ends up being, if it ends up being on the list at all. I'll just leave that as a surprise. But let me know your thoughts on the game. Let me know your thoughts on the format of this video, what you think about my reactions, if I completely off base on any of my points. Do you disagree? Do you agree? I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all that fun YouTube stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, and I am going to turn my attention back to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and hopefully make some progress through that, as well as I hope to be able to bring you an initial impressions of Stellar Blade that comes out next week. So that's a little tease of some things that are coming, as well as many more surprises that I have up my sleeves. But I am going to get out of here, and I will see you all around for future videos. So hope you enjoyed. If so, let me know. But I am going to see you next time. So till then, peace out.